What happens to your brain when you read out loud for just 5 minutes a day? You wake up in the morning and you check your phone. You scroll through 15 headlines. You skim 3 emails. You read a push notification from your doctor's office reminding you of an appointment you already forgot you had scheduled. You read the back of a cereal box while waiting for coffee to brew. You read a long text message from a family member that required a real response, and you typed a short one because you had already moved on. By 9 in the morning, you have read more words than most people in the 18th century read in a week. And you remember almost none of them, not because you were distracted, not because you were tired, not because the content was unimportant. You remember almost none of them because of a single decision your brain made about how to process every word you encountered. It processed them through one channel out of 3 that were available to it. Your eyes moved. Your brain decoded. Your mouth stayed closed. Your voice was off. Your ears received nothing from the page. And your brain processed every single word you read this morning through a single pathway visual, while 2 other complete processing systems sat completely idle. Every word on your phone, every headline, every email, every notification, all of it entered your brain through one door, while 2 other doors remained locked. You did not notice the locked doors because single-channel reading feels complete. It feels like you are getting everything. The words arrive. The meaning registers. What else could there be? There are 2 other complete things your brain could have done with those words, and it did neither of them, and the cost of that is sitting in your inability to recall what you read an hour ago, a day ago, a week ago. That cost has a name. It has a measurement, and it has a solution that requires nothing more than your own voice and 5 minutes a day. Let us be precise about what happens in your brain when you read silently, because the architecture matters. When your eyes move across a line of text and you read it without speaking, 2 brain regions activate. The visual word form area, sometimes called the brain's letterbox, decodes the shapes of letters into recognizable words. And Wernicke's area, the region responsible for language comprehension, extracts the meaning from those decoded words. 2 regions. 1 pathway, eyes to meaning. That is the entire circuit. Everything else is quiet. Now read the same words aloud and the architecture changes entirely. Broca's area, the region responsible for speech planning, must sequence the precise motor commands required to produce every syllable before your mouth moves. Your motor cortex must then execute those commands across more than 100 muscles. The muscles of your diaphragm control your breath. The muscles of your larynx shape your pitch. 8 distinct muscles in your tongue position themselves for each consonant and vowel. The muscles around your lips close or round or release depending on the specific sounds required. Your soft palate routes air through either your nasal cavity or your mouth. Your jaw opens and closes with each vowel. This coordination runs at approximately 14 phonemes per second in normal adult speech. 14 per second, that is one of the fastest, most complex motor sequences your body is capable of producing. It is faster than your fingers on a keyboard, faster than a pianist's hands at full tempo, faster than any athletic movement you perform in daily life. And while all of that is happening, your auditory system receives the result. Your brain treats your own voice as incoming speech and runs it through the full comprehension pipeline a second time. You are simultaneously the speaker and the listener. Your eyes decoded the text once. Your ears are now processing what your mouth just produced as though it were brand new information arriving from outside you. 3 systems running in parallel, visual, motor, and auditory. 3 processing pathways, all engaged on the same content at the same time. Each system creates its own independent memory trace, not a stronger version of the same memory. 3 separate records, stored in different locations, retrievable through different cues, each one capable of pulling the entire memory back on its own. Researchers call the measurable result of this the production effect. Words read aloud are remembered 15 to 20% better than words read silently. Tested immediately. Tested after a delay of hours. Tested after a delay of days. Across every age group examined, the advantage holds consistently. 15 to 20% sounds modest until you translate it into real terms. If you read silently and retain 80 words of meaningful content from 100, reading aloud would give you 93 to 96, compounded across a week of reading, across a month, across a year of information you actually need to retain. Medical instructions, financial details, professional knowledge, the things that shape your decisions, the gap is not modest. It is the difference between a mind that holds what it takes in and a mind that leaks most of it before it can be used. Here is something about your own voice that no one has told you. It reaches your brain through two completely separate pathways that no other voice can use. When someone else speaks to you, their voice travels through the air as sound waves, enters your ear canal, vibrates your eardrum, and is processed by your auditory cortex. That is the only path available to anyone else's voice. Air conduction. One route. When you speak, your voice reaches your ears through air conduction as well, but it also travels through the bones of your skull directly to your inner ear. The bone pathway transmits lower frequency sounds more efficiently than air alone, which is why your voice sounds richer and deeper to you than it sounds to anyone else in the room. You know this phenomenon. You have heard a recording of your own voice and felt the slight wrongness of it. Thinner, higher, less resonant than the voice you hear when you speak. The recording captures only what air conduction delivers. The voice you hear live while you are speaking is air conduction plus bone conduction. A richer, more complex signal, more low-frequency content. Simultaneous input to both ears because bone conduction reaches through the skull bilaterally. Your brain receives this richer version and engages with it more deeply than it engages with any other voice. This is not psychological. It is acoustic. Your own voice is objectively the richest auditory signal your brain can receive. And when you read aloud, you are feeding that signal directly into your comprehension system as a second pass over content your eyes just decoded. The dual pathway signal, the bilateral engagement, the simultaneous speaker-listener position your brain occupies when you read aloud. These are not marginal advantages. They are architectural differences in how much of your brain is active and how many independent memory traces are being formed at the same time. Your memory does not retrieve based on effort. It retrieves based on distinctiveness. When you try to remember something, the dosage on a prescription, the key number from a financial document, the specific instructions your physician gave you at the end of an appointment, your retrieval system is not searching for the strongest memory. It is searching for the most distinctive one, the memory that stands out from the background of everything else stored in a similar format. Here is the problem. Every word you read silently is encoded in an identical format through an identical pathway using an identical mechanism as every other word you have ever read silently. The prescription label you read on Tuesday is stored in the same way as the email you skimmed on Monday, and the article you half read on Sunday, and the 10,000 other visually encoded memories your brain created this week. They do not stand out from each other. They blend. They compete. Your retrieval system reaches into that dense, undifferentiated background and frequently cannot locate what it is looking for, not because the memory is gone, but because it looks exactly like everything else. A word you spoke aloud is different. That memory carries what your eyes saw. It carries what your mouth did, the specific way your tongue positioned itself on the consonants, how your breath supported the syllables, the way your lips shaped the sounds. And it carries what your ears heard, the sound of that word in your own voice at your own pitch, in your own rhythm. 3 retrieval cues. Any one of them can locate the memory. The visual trace, the motor trace, or the auditory trace. Find anyone, and the entire memory comes back. The probability of successful retrieval does not increase because you tried harder. It increases because the memory is stored in 3 locations instead of 1. This is why the prescription label you read silently and cannot recall an hour later would have stayed available to you for days if you had spoken it once at normal speed. The memory does not require more effort. It requires more encoding pathways. The voice provides those pathways, and it does so without adding a single second to your reading time. The time required to read a sentence aloud is essentially identical to the time required to read it silently. The voice is the only variable. The memory improvement is architectural. A question this raises is worth staying with. If reading aloud activates the speech production system, maintains the motor pathways, creates auditory encoding, why doesn't conversation do the same thing? You speak every day, you produce speech, you hear your own voice. Why is conversation insufficient? The answer is in what you are speaking. Conversational speech draws from a limited vocabulary. The words you use with friends, with colleagues, in text messages and phone calls, are words whose motor programs are so thoroughly rehearsed that your mouth produces them without meaningful effort. Broca's area barely engages because there is nothing to plan. The sequences are automated. Your tongue has shaped these sounds thousands of times. Your breath knows how to support these phrases without instruction. The cognitive demand is low. The circuits are active but not challenged. There is a difference between maintaining a system and exercising it at the complexity it requires to stay fully functional. Written language is categorically different from spoken language, even in casual texts, even in simple news articles, even in the instruction manual for a household appliance. Written text uses vocabulary that is measurably richer and syntactically more complex than speech. The average sentence in a newspaper is longer and more structurally complex than the average sentence in a conversation. A novel, a medical document, a scientific article, the complexity gap between these and daily conversation is enormous. When you read aloud from written text, your mouth is forced to produce words it has not recently shaped. Your tongue navigates consonant clusters it has not recently encountered. Your breath must budget across multi-clause sentences whose end it cannot see from the beginning. Broca's area is genuinely working. The motor cortex is managing sequences that are not automated. The timing coordination between breath and voice and articulation is being challenged. Challenged circuits maintain differently than coasting circuits. A speech production system exercised at conversational complexity maintains at conversational complexity. A speech production system exercised at the complexity of written language maintains at the complexity of written language. The circuits that produce your most articulate speech, the circuits you need when giving an important presentation, explaining something complex to someone you need to convince, finding the precise word in a moment that requires precision, those circuits are maintained through what you ask of them. And conversation, for most adults in the modern world, does not ask very much. There is a dimension of reading aloud that is almost never discussed, and it is happening in your chest while your eyes and mouth and ears are occupied with the text. Reading silently makes no demands on your respiratory system. Your breathing continues at its resting rate, 12 to 20 cycles per minute, unrelated to what you are reading, uncoordinated with the sentences on the page, autonomous. Reading aloud forces a different relationship between your breath and the text. You must take a breath at a clause boundary, at a period, at a natural pause. The sentence structure on the page becomes the governor of your inhale and exhale. If the sentence is long, your breath must be deeper to carry the phrase to its end. If a subordinate clause interrupts the main thought, an idea inside an idea, a qualification embedded in the middle of a longer construction, your respiratory system must budget its air supply across the full architecture of the sentence, holding enough in reserve to complete the main thought after the interruption ends. Your breathing is now subordinated to the syntax of written language. Written sentences are longer and more structurally complex than spoken utterances, and the breathing pattern that reading aloud imposes reflects that complexity. Slower breaths, deeper inhales, longer exhales across multi-clause sentences. A rhythm dictated not by your body's resting needs but by the punctuation on the page. This breathing pattern falls into a range that physiologists associate with increased vagal tone, the activity of the vagus nerve, which connects your brainstem to your heart, your lungs, and your digestive system, and plays a central role in regulating your body's stress and recovery states. Slower, deeper, more rhythmic breathing increases heart rate variability, which is one of the most reliable physiological markers of autonomic balance, the state in which your nervous system is neither in high alert nor in shutdown, but in the calm, focused range associated with clear thinking and sustained attention. You will notice this if you try it. Read aloud for 5 minutes from any text, a book, an article, anything with complete sentences, and then stop. The breathing pattern does not immediately revert to its resting rhythm. Your respiratory system has been entrained by the syntactic structure of the text for 5 minutes, and the entrainment persists for a short time after the reading ends. The calm that follows is not incidental. It is physiological, a breathing pattern imposed by sentence structure that outlasts the reading itself. 5 minutes of reading aloud produces a measurable shift in autonomic tone through a mechanism most people would never think to attribute to a reading practice. There is a quality control mechanism built into reading aloud that silent reading structurally cannot replicate. When you read aloud and your voice produces a sentence, your auditory system processes that sentence as incoming speech. The full comprehension pipeline runs on your own output. You are checking what you just read in real time, through a completely separate processing channel from the one that decoded it. If something is wrong, if you misread a word, if the sentence structure collapses when spoken, if the meaning you assumed from visual decoding does not survive the translation to sound, your auditory system catches the discrepancy and flags it. You have experienced this. You were reading aloud and you stopped mid-sentence. Something did not sound right. You went back. You reread. The sentence that your eyes had passed over without hesitation revealed itself as something different when your voice attempted to produce it. A word you saw as one thing turned out to be another. A sentence structure your visual system accepted without examination collapsed when spoken into the air. The auditory feedback loop catches errors at a rate that visual-only processing cannot match. Silent reading has no equivalent check. Your eyes move forward. Your visual system assigns meaning. Your comprehension system accepts what arrives. There is no second pass, no independent verification, no mechanism to surface the gap between what you thought you read and what the text actually said. This matters for anything where precise comprehension matters. Medical information, legal documents, financial instructions, technical specifications. Any text where the difference between what you thought it said and what it actually said has real consequences. And there is a second dimension to this comprehension loop. The sentence, "She did not take the medication," has multiple possible meanings depending on emphasis. Read silently, it delivers no stress pattern. Your visual system assigns a default interpretation, the most likely meaning given context, and moves on. The ambiguity is never examined. Read aloud, you must choose where to place the stress. That choice requires comprehension. You cannot perform a sentence without understanding it well enough to decide how to say it. And if you cannot find the right stress pattern, if the sentence resists performance, you have not yet fully understood it, and reading aloud makes that gap audible in a way that silent reading will never reveal. Word-finding difficulty. The name that is there and then suddenly is not. The sentence that starts and then stalls while you search for the word that belongs in the middle of it. The sense that verbal fluency, the ease with which speech once came, is not quite what it was 10 years ago. These are the experiences that bring people to their doctors worried about early cognitive decline. And sometimes those concerns are warranted and require medical attention. But before that worry takes hold, there is a question worth asking. Is the decline in the brain? Or is it in the input the brain has been receiving? The speech production circuits, the planning regions, the motor pathways, the timing coordination between breath and voice and articulation maintain themselves through use at sufficient complexity. Every neural connection in your brain operates on the same principle. Connections that fire regularly at sufficient demand maintain their processing speed and their synaptic strength. Connections that are underused thin. Eventually they prune. Consider what a typical modern day actually provides your speech production system. You read silently, the speech circuits are dormant. You watch streaming content, the speech circuits are dormant. You scroll through social media, the speech circuits are dormant. You send text messages, the language circuits are engaged, but the motor speech circuits are not. You listen to podcasts, the comprehension circuits are active, the production circuits are quiet. The only sustained activation your speech production system receives in most modern days is conversation. And conversation, as established, operates at reduced complexity. Familiar vocabulary, short sentences, automated motor sequences, the circuits that produce complex speech, the circuits that sequence unfamiliar words, navigate long subordinate clauses, coordinate respiratory timing across elaborate sentence structures, receive almost no activation from the modern adult's typical day. If you were an articulate speaker at 40 and you notice word-finding difficulty at 55, the circuit may not be declining from age. It may be declining from disuse. The word is there. The retrieval pathway to it may have thinned because nothing in your daily life has been asking that pathway to fire. The tip of the tongue experience is a retrieval failure in a circuit that has not been exercised at the complexity level the retrieval demands. Not a loss, a thinning from disuse that can be reversed. 5 minutes of reading aloud daily changes the input your speech production system receives entirely. Your motor system coordinates more than 100 muscles at 14 phonemes per second, sequencing words that your conversational vocabulary does not include, navigating consonant clusters your tongue has not recently shaped, managing respiratory timing across sentences that no conversation would impose. Your auditory system processes your own voice through the richest signal available to it, bone conduction and air conduction simultaneously, running a second comprehension check on every sentence your eyes just decoded. Your memory system encodes through 3 independent channels instead of 1, creating 3 retrieval pathways for every piece of information you read. Your respiratory system subordinates to the syntactic structure of the text, producing a breathing pattern that shifts autonomic tone toward the calm, focused state associated with clear thinking and sustained attention. 5 minutes, any text, any room. The room can be empty, a kitchen, a bedroom, the car in a parking lot before you go inside. The circuits do not know whether anyone is listening. They fire identically whether you are reading to a partner, to a pet, to a wall, or to no one. The audience is irrelevant to the mechanism. The mechanism requires your voice, your ears, and your eyes operating on text simultaneously. That is all. If you have not read aloud in years, and most adults have not, outside of reading to children, the first minute will feel unfamiliar. Your voice will sound strange to you in the context of a book. You may stumble on words that your eyes would have passed over without effort. Long words, technical words. Words with consonant clusters that your mouth has not been asked to produce in months. The stumbling is not a problem. The stumbling is the mechanism revealing which circuits have thinned. Each stumble is a word whose motor program has weakened. A pathway your mouth once navigated easily that has narrowed from disuse. Reading that word aloud is the activation that pathway needs. By the 3rd day, the stumbles begin to decrease. The motor programs are reactivating. The words that resisted your mouth on day 1 come more smoothly by day 4. By the 2nd week, something else becomes noticeable. Not just easier reading. The words come more readily in conversation too. The sentences form more cleanly. The slight hesitation that had become normal the moment of searching before the word arrives begins to shorten. The reading aloud is not just encoding the text better, it is maintaining the speech production system at a complexity level that your conversational life has not been providing. And the maintenance transfers. The circuits that produce speech do not distinguish between reading aloud and speaking in conversation. They are the same circuits. Exercise them through reading and they show up stronger in every other context where you need them. Silent reading is a recent invention. For the first 3,000 years of written language, from the earliest cuneiform tablets in Sumer, through Greek scrolls, through the manuscripts of Rome, reading meant speaking. Text and voice were inseparable. Reading was a performance. Libraries were not quiet. They were halls of voices, every scholar reading simultaneously, every text spoken into the air. When Augustine of Hippo, writing in the 4th century, observed his teacher Ambrose of Milan reading without moving his lips, he recorded it as a remarkable phenomenon, something worth documenting. The act of reading silently was unusual enough, strange enough to be noted in a memoir as an exceptional behavior. For the previous millennia, that behavior, silent reading, would have seemed not just unusual but incomplete. Reading without speaking would have seemed like hearing music without listening to it, like looking at food without tasting it. The text was meant to be spoken. The voice was considered part of the reading, not a supplement to it. The shift to silent reading was gradual and driven by convenience. You could read faster because your eyes could move ahead of what your mouth could produce. You could read in shared spaces without disturbing others. You could read at night without waking anyone beside you. The convenience was real. The cost was invisible because the cost was not in what silent reading added. It was in what it subtracted. Triple encoding reduced to single. The auditory feedback loop switched off. The respiratory coupling between breath and syntax abandoned. The bilateral brain engagement reduced to predominantly one side. The convenience accumulated. The cost accumulated invisibly alongside it. And the word finding that gets harder, the memory that holds less, the verbal fluency that thins across the decades, some portion of that, a portion that researchers are still measuring, may not be aging alone. Some of it may be a 1,500-year-old convenience, taking what it always took, unnoticed, from the circuits that reading aloud would have maintained. 5 minutes, not a practice, not a discipline, not a commitment that requires willpower or scheduling or accountability. 5 minutes of your own voice on text, any text, the book on your nightstand, the article you meant to read properly, the email that deserved more than a skim. Your voice, deeper and richer to you than to anyone else in the world, carried through the bones of your skull and the air of the room simultaneously, is three complete processing systems activating at once, waking up, running at the complexity they were built for. Silent reading turned them off gradually across years, and the turning off felt like nothing because silent reading always felt complete. It felt like you were getting everything. You were getting the words. 5 minutes gives you the rest.